Mediator's pen stopped moving. She set it down slowly, looked up from the folder in front of her, and said something I hadn't expected anyone in that room to say. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I grew up in a house where the highest praise you could receive was silence. Not the warm kind, the kind that meant you hadn't done anything wrong yet. My father ran the household the way he ran his contracting business, with margins, expectations, and very little room for sentiment. My mother organized everything around him: his schedule, his meals, his opinion. I was the second of 2 children. My brother was 4 years older and had, from birth apparently, done everything right. He played baseball through high school. He went to state. He married a woman my parents approved of before he was 26. He bought a house 8 minutes from theirs. I became a nurse, not a doctor, not a hospital administrator. A floor nurse, which to my father meant I had chosen a career of wiping things up and following orders. He said that once, almost word for word, at a Christmas dinner when I was 24. I remember staring at the green bean casserole and deciding not to respond. My mother laughed like it was a gentle joke. My brother's wife looked at her plate. I kept working. I took extra shifts. I moved into a small apartment 40 minutes away from that house, and I built something that was mine: a routine, a group of colleagues I trusted, a life that didn't require anyone's approval to feel real. Then my grandmother died. Her name was June, and she was the one person in my family who had ever looked at me the way you look at someone you're actually happy to see. She called me every Sunday. She kept a photo of me in my nursing scrubs on her mantel, right next to my brother's wedding portrait. She told me once that I had her mother's stubbornness, and she meant it as the highest compliment she knew how to give. She left me the house, not my parents, not my brother, me. It was a small craftsman on a corner lot about 20 minutes from where she'd lived her whole adult life. 3 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, a porch that sagged slightly on the left side, a fig tree in the backyard she'd planted from a cutting her own mother had brought from Georgia. The house needed work. It also needed someone who would actually live in it. She left it to me. I found out from her attorney 2 weeks after the funeral, sitting in a beige office with a box of tissues on the table I didn't use. The attorney was kind but efficient. He walked me through the will. He explained what was mine. I called my mother that evening to tell her before she heard it from anyone else. She didn't let me finish the sentence. The months that followed were the strangest of my life. Not because of the house. I loved the house. Quietly. In the way you love something you're still afraid to fully claim. I started small repairs. I repainted the porch. I learned more than I ever expected to know about gutters. What made those months strange was my family. My father called 3 times in 1 week, which in the entire previous decade had never happened. Each call was a variation of the same argument: that my grandmother hadn't been thinking clearly, that I had manipulated her somehow, that the right thing to do, the fair thing, was to sign the house over to my parents so they could sell it and divide the proceeds among the family. I said no. My brother came by the house once, unannounced, while I was scraping paint off the window frames. He stood at the end of the driveway in a polo shirt with his arms crossed and told me I was being selfish. I told him I was working and asked if he wanted to help. He left. My mother sent a text that was so long it came through in 3 separate messages. I read it once. I didn't respond. Then they hired a lawyer. The mediation was held in an office building downtown, the kind with glass doors and a fountain in the lobby that always seems vaguely out of place. I arrived 12 minutes early because that's what I do. I sat in a chair outside the conference room and drank bad coffee from a paper cup and told myself to stay calm. My parents arrived with their attorney, a man in a gray suit who had the particular confidence of someone who charges by the hour and knows it. My brother was behind them. He didn't look at me when they walked past. I had my own representation, a woman I'd found through a colleague, someone who specialized in estate disputes and who had, in our first meeting, reviewed the will and looked at me and said, "This is straightforward." I held on to that word like it was something physical. We settled into opposite sides of the table. The mediator introduced herself. She had gray hair and reading glasses and the focused, unflappable energy of someone who had heard everything. My father's attorney spoke first. He outlined their position, that my grandmother had shown signs of cognitive decline in her final year, that I had been her primary contact and therefore in a position of undue influence, that the inheritance as written was not a true reflection of her intentions. I kept my hands flat on the table. I had heard this version of events before, in the phone calls and the messages and the conversations my mother relayed to me through intermediaries, as if I were someone she couldn't speak to directly. It still hit differently hearing it said out loud in the room with a mediator and a court reporter. Undue influence. As if calling every Sunday and showing up when she asked me to and sitting with her through 2 rounds of physical therapy and driving her to appointments when my parents were, as they put it, too busy, as if all of that was manipulation. My attorney let him finish. Then she said, simply, that the will had been drafted by an independent attorney, that a competency evaluation had been completed at the time of signing, and that she had documentation for both. She slid a folder across the table. The mediator opened it. My father's attorney leaned over to look. There was a pause, the kind that has texture to it. Then my father said, loudly enough that it felt deliberate, "She was always like this, even as a kid. She doesn't think about anyone but herself." I want to tell you I was surprised. I want to say it knocked the air out of me, the way a betrayal is supposed to. But the truth is something heavier than surprise. It was recognition. The specific, exhausting recognition of hearing, in a formal setting with witnesses and documentation, the version of you that your family has carried around for years. I was the difficult one. The one who asked too many questions. The one who didn't come home enough, who didn't call enough, who made choices that couldn't be easily explained at dinner parties. She doesn't think about anyone but herself. I looked at my father when he said it. I didn't look away. The mediator set down her pen. What happened next took about 40 seconds, and I have replayed it more times than I can count. The mediator removed her reading glasses. She looked at my father with the kind of measured attention that is somehow more powerful than anger. "Sir," she said, "I need you to understand what I'm looking at." She held up a document from the folder my attorney had provided. Not the will itself, but something else. Something my attorney had included without telling me she planned to use it. It was a letter, written by my grandmother, notarized, dated 8 months before she died. The mediator read the relevant section aloud. I'm not going to repeat it word for word because some things belong only to the people they were meant for. But the substance of it was this. My grandmother had anticipated exactly this moment. She had written in her own words that she knew there would be a challenge. She had written why she made the choice she made. She had written about the Sunday calls, about the appointments, about the afternoon I drove 4 hours in a snowstorm because she had called me and her voice had sounded wrong and I hadn't been able to explain to myself why I needed to go, but I had gone anyway. She had written that she knew, without question, what kind of person I was. My father's attorney was quiet. My brother was looking at the table. My mother had her hand over her mouth. I was looking at the fig tree through the window. There was no fig tree. It was an office building. But in my mind I was looking at it anyway. The one in the backyard. The one she'd planted from a cutting. The one I had promised her I would not let die. The mediation ended without a settlement, which meant the legal challenge effectively dissolved. There wasn't enough to proceed on. My father's attorney said something to him quietly on their side of the table. My father nodded once, the way he nods when he is absorbing something he does not want to absorb. They left without speaking to me. My brother paused in the doorway. He turned around. He looked at me the way people look at someone when they're trying to find something to say that will be enough and coming up short. "I didn't know about the letter," he said. "I know," I said. He left. My attorney gathered her folders. She patted my hand once, professionally, and then she was on her phone in the hallway. The mediator was packing up her things. She stopped and looked at me. "Are you all right?" she asked. I thought about it for a second longer than the question probably warranted. "Yeah," I said. "I think I actually am. That was 14 months ago. The house is mine, fully and finally. I replaced the porch boards over the summer. The fig tree put out more fruit than I knew what to do with, so I left a box of it at the nurse's station at work, and my colleague Roseanne made jam and brought me a jar in December. I keep it on the kitchen counter. My father and I have spoken twice since the mediation. Both times were brief, formal in the way that conversations are when two people are feeling around the edges of something larger than they know how to address directly. I don't know what those conversations will eventually become. I'm trying to leave space for them without requiring them to be anything particular yet. My mother called me in October. She called on a Sunday, which I don't think was an accident. We talked for 40 minutes. She cried. I didn't, not on the phone. I waited until after we hung up. What she said and what I said during that call is between us. But she called. That matters to me more than I expected it to. My brother and I are finding our way back to each other slowly. The way you find your way back to someone when you've realized the distance between you was partly built by stories you both accepted without questioning them. We had dinner in November. His wife came. She's funnier than I'd given her credit for. What I've been thinking about in the months since is not the mediation room or the letter or even my father's face when the mediator read aloud the things my grandmother had written about me. What I keep thinking about is a Tuesday afternoon, maybe 2 years before she died, when I drove over to her house for no particular reason and found her on the porch, shelling butter beans into a colander. She didn't act surprised to see me. She just moved her bag off the other chair and handed me an empty bowl and said, "There's sweet tea in the refrigerator if you want some." I got myself a glass. I sat down. We shelled beans for an hour without talking much. That was all. That was the whole thing. But it's what I come back to. The particular, quiet, specific weight of being known by someone, of not having to explain yourself or perform yourself or defend yourself, of just being present and recognized and enough. She knew what kind of person I was. She wrote it down so no one could take it from me. I've been trying to live up to it ever since. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since that mediation room, not in any cosmic sense. I don't think the universe was settling a score on my behalf, but I do think that the choices we make, quietly and consistently, over years, tend to accumulate into something that eventually becomes visible, whether we want them to or not. My family built a story about me over decades. The difficult one. The one who left. The one who didn't care enough about appearances to perform the version of herself that would have made family dinners easier. And for a long time I let that story exist unchallenged because I didn't have the words to argue against it, or because arguing felt like it would cost more than it was worth, or because some part of me had absorbed enough of it that I wasn't entirely sure it wasn't true. What my grandmother did, and I've come to understand this more clearly with time, was refuse to let that story be the only one. She watched. She paid attention. She made a decision based not on who made the most noise or occupied the most space at the table, but on what she had actually witnessed over years of quiet Sunday phone calls and long drives and afternoons shelling beans on a porch. She chose evidence over narrative. That takes a kind of intelligence that doesn't get talked about enough. I think about that a lot when I'm at work. I'm a nurse. I spend my shifts making decisions in environments where the loudest voice in the room is rarely the most useful one, where what matters is accuracy, consistency, showing up when it's inconvenient, where the patient who gets the best care isn't necessarily the one with the most advocates, it's the one whose nurse paid attention. That's not a coincidence. The overlap between those two things, the values were already in me before I understood what they were. What I've had to learn, and I'm still learning it, is that living with integrity doesn't protect you from being misread. My grandmother knew this. She prepared for it. She didn't assume that doing the right thing would be self-evident to everyone in the room. She made sure there was a record. There's a kind of clear-eyed wisdom in that I find bracing whenever I think about it. It's not cynical, it's honest. The hardest part of this whole experience wasn't the mediation, or my father's words, or even the months of silence that followed. The hardest part was accepting that people who are supposed to know you can look directly at your life and still not see it. That's a grief that doesn't have a clean resolution. You just carry it differently as time passes. But here's what I know now that I didn't fully know before. Being known, really known, by even one person is not a small thing. It's enough to build on. My grandmother left me a house and a fig tree and a letter. What she actually left me was proof that the life I had been quietly living was real and was seen. You can't put a price on that. You can't divide it in a mediation room. I kept the house. I kept the tree. I'm keeping the jar of fig jam on the counter until it's gone, and then I'm going to ask Ruth Ann to make another one. Some things are exactly as straightforward as they appear.